Today we have with us Miss Priya Kumari. Just to tell one of the many laurels of hers, she is currently designated as an academic tutor and TRIP fellow at Jindal Global Law School. Having completed her LLM from NLU Jodhpur and BLLB from NLU Ranchi, she has always been interested in research and academics. She qualified UGC NET JRF in December 2020 and is currently working on several research themes like corporate social responsibility, traditional cultural expressions, and predatory pricing. We thank you, Ms. Priya, for joining her here today.
Hi, Palak. Thank you so much for the introduction. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. Hi.
Hi. So, just to start with, I personally feel that teaching has been considered one of the most noble professions of all. So, let us begin this session with your take on this, and please let us know why you chose this profession in academics.
So let me be very frank with it. When I was in my initial years of law school and I started doing internships, the law firm internships, as we used to call it, entering into a hotshot firm and doing their internship, meeting new people, meeting the corporate laurels. So it was all a dream, obviously. I think I was in my second or third year. But the state of panic that comes in when you have to be in the office for like 9 to 5 every day, and then you cannot get up before a senior associate gets up. It can be till 7, it can be till 8, and then you're being called at around 10 at night to compile all the facts of the case next day. So it can be like that. I personally never, liked this thing, but I had no idea whatsoever that law firms would be like that, because nobody in my entire extended family belongs to law background. So teaching came in the, even you can call it before law school, because I used to teach students. Even when I was in my schooling days, I used to teach students in my neighborhood, and also not on a commercial basis, but I like teaching to my friends, to my juniors, to students, to kids. So I personally thought that maybe pursuing this thing over, the law school, law firms thing would be better for me. And since then, when I realized that in my second or third year, the best part I did was to maintain my grades. And since I had maintained my grades and I knew that I had to go in this field, I started, building up my curriculum vitae accordingly. So it helped me a lot. And then when I came out of law school, it became very easy for me, very simple for me, straightforward for me to, select, pick a category and then go into research and academics. So it was like that.
That's a wonderful experience, Miss Priya. So, if you could also tell us all about what are the qualifications one requires for teaching in a degree college or a university, maybe, and what all exams should be clear in pursuance of the same.
So, starting with the basics first, you need to enter into a law school for your bachelor's, as simple as that. Now, there has been this trend of calling people from NLUs that they are the elites, whereas other universities people are not so elites. But that is entirely wrong. First of all, let me clarify. You need to belong to a law school. That's important. You need to maintain your grades. You need to work on certain things, which I'll carry on later or highlight later. Those things, if you are able to maintain it throughout your law school, and then your idea of being an academician is clear, you will enter into academics or research. It will not be a difficulty. The basic things you require or you need to, clear before for becoming an assistant professor or a teaching assistant in law is obviously getting a bachelor's degree in law. If it's with specialization, it actually helps. But nowadays, most of the universities in India are scrapping up the concept of specialization in undergraduate courses. But when you enter into masters, obviously you pick up one subject. So what I did was, when I was in my bachelor's at NLU Ranchi, I selected IPR as my specialization, but when I went to NLU Jodhpur, I chose corporate. Now, why I did this and why is it important is because in India, you know about the unemployment issues, and you know how, you know, thin, you know, job opportunities are. The lining is very thin. You have to be very careful about how you want to be in this field. So if your specialization is only in one field and you get to teach another law paper, because you cannot just say that, okay, I want to become a teacher, but I don't want to teach another law paper. I am comfortable with contracts, but I cannot teach constitutional law. So that is not liked by the recruiters, obviously. So first things first, I would suggest that on the basic side of the papers, that is constitutional law, contracts law, and nowadays commercial laws, be very clear on the basics. These things will help you a lot. And then when you want to pursue your master's degree, and if you already have a specialization, please try to change that specialization in your master's days. Then after you complete your master's and submit your dissertation, there's another thing which is called UGC NET, which is considered to be the basic qualification of being an assistant professor in India. However, the new guidelines have added certain other things. I'll come back to it later. But as of now, you need to understand that master's degree plus UGC NET is the minimum qualification as specified by the University Grants Commission. So you need to clear these both. And personally, I would suggest that if you are sitting for, you know, qualifying NET examination, be very clear and qualify JRF too. Because when you enter into the field of academics, you'll understand that NET was just, you know, the entering path in academics, and thereafter you'll have to pursue PhD, because your career would not stop at being an assistant professor. You never dreamt of entering and ending your career with being an assistant professor. You want to be a professor someday, or a VC someday, or a dean someday. For that, you need to have to do PhD somewhere in your life, sometime in your life. For that, you will need, and it's beneficial if you have also qualified JRF. So yeah, these are the basic things you need to clear for becoming an assistant professor.
Thank you, Miss Priya. So I think that you have slightly hinted on the career trajectory as well. So I would like you to elaborate a little on that, as to how do you see yourself, or how a normal person who wishes to pursue this would see their career trajectory as.
So it can all start by being a teaching assistant. When you are pursuing your master's degree, and most of the universities in India, I know of national universities because I belong to national universities, so I'm very clear on that most of the national universities have a thing called, when you are pursuing your master's, they provide you with a form, and it's basically about being a teaching assistant. So you need to fill that form in your very first semester of your master's degree, and then you select the teachers, and according to your grades, according to your specialization, and according to the time availability of the concerned teacher, you are being allotted as a teaching assistant. Now you need to understand that teaching assistant is basically when you are assisting the actual professor or the teacher in the course. You will not be teaching. And that makes sense because you are also a student of that particular university at that point of time. So say I am a teaching assistant to a professor A in my corporate law field, or a subject called corporate governance. So what I will do is I'll sit with that particular teacher. I will try to frame the moot propositions if any is coming up. I try to help her in framing the course curriculum. I'll also go with her in all the classes she takes, so that I understand how she presents, how she talks to the students. And then also I can also talk to the students if allowed by the particular professor. So basically it's like you are teaching, and you are on the background of the teaching sphere right now, because you're also a student. Now what happens is what is beneficial about it, this is that you already have an experience, hands-on experience as to how it is from being a student to being a teaching assistant. Now when you come out of the law school, completing your masters, and you qualified your UGC NET, or even not that, because most of the universities, not some of the private universities allow you to enter as assistant professor or teaching assistant in law without having a NET. degree. So what happens then is you teach at that point of time, because you have completed your master's degree, and if then you are being called a teaching assistant, you will be given the right to teach. For instance, I know of Nirma University, they come up with post of teaching assistants and they provide you the hands-on experience of teaching. You are a teacher, just a grade lower than that of assistant professor, because maybe you have not qualified net as of now. Now, then what happens in your career path is you become an assistant professor. Now, for being an assistant professor, as I said earlier, you have to clear net after completing your master's. And then you go on to pursue your PhD, which takes like 3 to 4 years if you are lucky. And then you become an associate professor. Then after having like 10 to 15 years of experience, you go on to become a professor. So, it goes on like that. And then obviously, if you are lucky enough, till your 50s, 40s or 50s, you'll also be the vice chancellor of the particular universities, because till now you will have a lot of things on your CV, or you have done a lot many things that you could be called a laurel in that particular field or in that particular subject. So you have made the vice chancellor of the particular university. Now the university I'm in, and the vice chancellor of that particular university, Jindal, if you know him, Professor C. Rajkumar, he became the vice chancellor at the age of 35. And yeah, so that is something awesome. I mean, I did not hear of it. I read about him and I was like surprised to know. So that happens if you are able to, not sit, because people think that teaching is a very, monotonous or boring profession, because all you have to do is teach. But it is not like that. It is not like that. If you are present in the seminars or conferences, you are presenting papers, you're talking to people, you are writing research papers, you are building networks, you can be a professor earlier than you think. So that is how it all goes.
Thank you for elaborating so nicely, Priya. As you've already quite identified what is JRF and what is NET, I would just like you to further differentiate between the two, and how should an average law student, deal with it or approach these two exams?
Okay. So first of all, every student is good. There's nothing called an average or a brilliant student. I am a law student for
Indeed,
life.
indeed.
You all will be law students for life. Yeah. So okay.
Just to
So UGC
clarify,
net.
I did
Yeah.
not mean average by the means of intellect. I meant a
Yeah.
student who has average responsibilities, who is averagely involved, in terms of societies, in terms of academics. How should that person, see towards this?
Yeah. So NET is basically the national eligibility test. That is the test taken to judge whether or not you are able enough to teach in a particular university. So that is NET. And then comes JRF, that is Junior Research Fellowship, which is granted by the government, so that you can pursue your research, or more specifically your PhD, because overall you're adding to the research and economic growth of the entire country. You're adding it up to the infrastructure, so that the government helps you. So let me begin with NET. So when you are preparing for NET, there are basically two papers, since you are law students. So there will be one general paper, which is the same for everyone, for every stream, every student trying to try to become a professor in their own particular fields. That paper remains same. That is paper one. Now the second paper, our particular paper, that is law, would have like 100 questions, 2 marks each. And the pattern is more or less whatever law subjects you have studied since the first year of your law school. So as I pointed out earlier, the basic papers, that is constitutional law, contracts law, and jurisprudence. Obviously, these papers are the ones you need to get your hold. From the initial years, I always suggest the law students to make clear notes of constitution, jurisprudence, and keep it handy, because whether you appear for CLAT, for SET, for any LSAT, or for NET for that matter, you will get direct questions from these papers. because these are the papers which build your entire law career, whether you are a corporate lawyer, whether you are pursuing IPR, or whether you are an academician, or whether you are a researcher. You cannot just keep, constitutional law, jurisprudence at bay. You'll have to deal it one day or other. So these papers are important. And then as I mentioned, that net asks questions from any possible paper. So it is commercial law, including Competition Act, including Negotiable Instruments Act, including Sale of Goods Act. And then it also asks questions from IPR. IPR is gaining importance because obviously people are knowing about it. So you can expect like 4 to 5 questions directly from IPR section, whether it be trademarks, copyrights, designs, anything, Semiconductors Act, anything. Then comes obviously the criminal law. Now net focuses only on Indian Penal Code, and the syllabus is mentioned clearly on the net website. So any law student, and I would suggest that if you are appearing for the June examination, say June 2021, so you check it in January or February of 21, because it keeps on changing. The pattern keeps on changing. The syllabus gets updated every time. So it is better for a law student if you keep on visiting the official net website. Also the dates and the forms dates, it all comes and goes. And since there are many examinations that are conducted by UGC, it all gets a bit typical. So you need to get to the base of it and know what are the dates, when are the forms available, and what are the subjects they are asking. Now the JRF part of it. Now what happens is, when you give the net examination, as I said earlier, one is general paper and one is the law paper. You qualify when you have 40% marks in each of the papers. That is only the qualifying marks. You have not qualified net. You have just qualified enough to now come in that portion of the student section where you will be considered whether or not you are next to the cutoff marks. Fine. So that is 40%. And that is 40% in individual papers. That is in general paper, that is the part 1 paper and the part 2 paper. Now, once you have achieved the 40% marks, now they will judge you on the cutoff percentage, and cutoff percentage changes every year. Now let me tell you about this, because when I was appearing for net and I saw the list of past year, the previous year list, and I saw it was around the JRF cutoff was around 64%, and the net cutoff was around 59 or 60%. But this time when I qualified it in December 2020, the JRF percentage was around 69.33%, and the net percentage was around 62 or 64. So yes, it keeps on changing. So you need to be you need to have a focus so that you are able to get at least 70 to 75% marks when you're practicing papers or practicing previous year papers, of especially the general paper, because otherwise these percentage keeps on changing and you'll be nowhere, because even if you get like 69.32%, you'll not qualify it. So it's like that. It's that tough. The crack here is that after you get that 40% marks, it is that combined marks that is seen. As I told you, 40% is seen individually, that you have 40% each in each paper. But after that, the cutoff marks would be on the basis of the combined marks of both the papers. So if you're able to get more marks in general paper, which is easy, far easy, because you will get the previous year question papers easily on the internet. There are books who deal with the concepts very well. And there are YouTube videos. There are several, courses on net which deal with general paper very fluently. So I always suggest that please be very sure of your first paper. Get the maximum out of it, because the law part of it is difficult. Let's be very frank about it. It keeps on changing. The pattern keeps on changing. The questions keep on changing. You'll not be able to, tackle it. And within a span of 3 hours straight, you have to complete the entire paper. Now, the second thing is JRF. JRF is, some percentage over and above the net cutoff marks. Net is the minimum eligibility criteria for being an assistant professor, but by qualifying JRF, you are not only able to become an assistant professor in universities in India, but also you are qualified of, pursuing PhD with a grant or with a fellowship, which will be provided by the government. So since, see, for instance, see, if I have qualified JRF, but I now have a full-time job, so I'll not be able to get that fellowship. But consider a situation when I did not have a full-time job and I qualified JRF and I wanted to pursue my PhD. So within a time span of 3 years of getting my certificate, of getting my JRF certificate, if I applied to a particular university, say Jindal itself, and the vice chancellor of that particular university writes to me that, okay, now you are enrolled in our PhD program. So then that would be taken, as a certificate, and then I'll be provided with a grant, which is like in your junior year or your first year, you'll be getting 30,000 per month plus the house rent allowance and everything. And then it goes on. And then if you are being approved each year and you become a senior research fellow by the end of, I think, first year, you will be provided with 35 to 38,000 per month. So it goes on like that, so that you can do your PhD easily. Therefore, I always recommend that whenever you are sitting for NET, be very serious about it and clear both NET and JRF, because it will be very useful for you. You will have to go for PhD sometime or the other. So yes, that's NET and JRF.
Ms. Priya, that was a very elaboratively and useful explanation of both the exams. Thank you for this. I would just like, considering that how difficult these exams might get, what is your recommendation as to when a particular student who is averagely involved in activities, who is writing research papers or doing internships, should start their focus or should start preparing seriously for these exams? And if any books or other material, if you could suggest to our viewers here today. Thank you.
Yeah, so if you want to enter into the field of academics or research, the very basic things you need to keep in mind is that you are able to publish research papers. You are able to publish research papers in law school. You need to understand that it is important. It is important for you being an academician or a researcher, either way, because it is the teaching profession is not only about teaching. It is not only about teaching, it is about research, it is about publications, it is about seminars and conferences. So when you are a law student, I would suggest that you be an active member of member or volunteer or any other opportunity that you get of being involved in a seminar or conferences. When you are in your first or second year, obviously you cannot present papers because you are too young for that, but you can obviously be a volunteer or a rapporteur of the persons visiting for presenting their papers at your university or other universities. You can just be a part of it. You can understand how this thing works, how this concept works. So when I was a law student, I used to enter or enroll my names in it, just to get the feel of it, to understand how the system works, because I was new to it, and I know most of the students nowadays are. But thankfully there are platforms like LinkedIn and several other professional platforms where they are able to get to know the people who are already working. So for law students, I would suggest that yes, if you are interested in the field of academics, please understand that there are certain lists specified, for instance, like the UGC care list and good, publishing companies. Please do not go for, the paid ones, because they are of no use on your CV. You need to understand that it should be peer reviewed publications. Peer reviewed, it is clearly understandable, self-explanatory, but you need to understand that if your paper gets published within days or within weeks, it would not add anything to your CV. If it is peer reviewed, if it is of UGC care list, and then if it is of conferences organized by universities and then they are publishing it, and whether it be private universities or whether it be NLUs, it's good. It's adding something on your CV. Publications. Secondly, seminars or conferences. Third, you need to understand that when you're building your CV, there is a huge difference between resume and curriculum vitae. So resume is what you prepare when you want to go or enter into law firms, or make in the corporate sector, work in that field. So you prepare that mentioning your internships and what you did in that internship, what you learned from that internship, things like that. But when you prepare a curriculum vitae, it is for the field of research and academics. Now, what you mention on that CV is that how many publications you have had, what in your masters, what was your dissertation, and many universities I see nowadays also have dissertation in your bachelor's days. So what dissertation you have had in your bachelor's days, and then the seminars or conferences you have attended, or the papers you have presented, these kind of things are mentioned. And also, most importantly, your consistent grades. By consistent grades, I do not mean that you have to be the topper of your batch. I do not mean that. I just mean that if you're getting a 7 CGPA or GPA in your first semester, please do not jump down or jump high as 8 GPA in your second semester. It should be something like 7, 7.1, 6.9, 7.2, something like that, so that the recruiter or the person who is there to hire you sees that the graph is something like this. It is either growing or going down by only a pinch, and not something like this. You cannot go like that. So it all highlights what you did in your law school. So curriculum vitae is that. Now, secondly, as you asked, the books. Are you asking about the books for NET or for CLAT?
No, for net.
Okay, for NET, I would suggest that for the basic paper, go for KVS Madan. KVS Madan is the book which clears the concepts in a good way. So you can easily go through the chapters. And I think there are 10 chapters, and from each chapter you get 5 questions. So for clearing the concepts, go for KVS Madan. There's no second take on it. Now, it is only for clearing the concepts. I do not go into the question answer section of KVS Madan because it has a huge load of wrong answers. Yes, and you will start questioning yourself that I do not know anything. And it's also tough. I don't know why, very tough. They have created it for God knows why. But then you can easily get previous year question papers on the internet. You have to just Google it up, you'll get it. Previous year question papers, you will get it in, like, I think 10-year question papers, 13-year question papers for the paper 1. That is very helpful. Wherever you are sitting, whether 5 days are left for the examination or 3 months are left for the examination, solve the previous year question papers of the first part. It helps. And also, secondly, set a timer when you are solving the paper. Why I'm saying this? Because as I mentioned earlier, that you are provided with only 3 hours of time to solve the entire NET paper, which consists of 50 questions from general part and 100 questions for the law part. And trust me on this, even if the general part consists of questions from mathematical ability and data interpretation, you have to give only 1 hour to it. You have to have at least 2 hours of time for your law paper, because it will get tough. The questions they ask and the kind of the sections or the kind of things they do in the case laws, you will get confused. So I always say that when you start preparing for it or solving the previous year question papers of general paper, set a timer when you are solving it and try to come somewhere near to 1 hour or 1 hour 15 minutes in completing the entire paper, so that you have like at least 1 hour 45 minutes in hand for your second paper. So then you will be easily getting through the entire paper in the 3-hour shift. And also, if luck permits, you will have like 15-20 minutes in your hand to check the paper, because unless and until you have submitted the entire paper, which happens instantly after the finishing line of 3 hours, you are able to visit back and check your answers and mark this. There is no negative marking like CLAT in it. So attempt the questions. Also, if you are from a non-law background like I was, I would suggest, if you can sit and if you have time, say if you have enrolled in your masters, so you'll be enrolling in your masters in the month of June, July, most probably, and then there would be an examination in the month of December, because NET happens twice a year, that is June and December. So you will have like 2 trials during your master's days. That would be December of the first semester and June of the second semester. So what you can do is you can sit in the December paper with a blank mind. Just sit or appear in the paper, to know the pattern of the paper, to understand the pattern of the paper, to take it in, and then start preparing. If you're already prepared, it's good, but I would suggest to just sit with a blank mind and see where you stand, because you have to face the questions you have already been seeing for the past 5 to 6 years in your law school. It is just the MCQ part of it. So you will know where you stand, you'll know your strong and the weak points, and then you can work on that. So yes.
Thank you, Ms. Priya. I think this was a very, very useful tip, because even I personally feel that when I'm preparing for an exam, I only give it when I think I'm at least fairly prepared. We do not attempt a paper unless we think that we can attempt it.
Yes.
So that is a very useful tip. I have, as you've already covered a lot of it, I have just a follow up question in my chat box that I would like you to address. It is that do internships play an important role for a person who wants to be an who wants to pursue this particular field? And if yes, then what kind of internships should a person pursue?
Okay. So see, as I mentioned earlier, that resume is where you write things about your internship, because you are
Yes.
thinking of going or entering into law firms. Now people often ask me that if I want to become a researcher or a professor, there is no need of interning. But that is not the right, that is not the right mindset. Why do I say that? Because when you are a student or a fresher, when you come out of your master's, pursuing your master's degree, and when a recruiter sees your CV and they find no internships in it, I mean, law and internships, they are intertwined, they are together, they just go together. And to learn the things, to see the reality, you need to do internships. Yes, but also I would like to add that it is not that important in the field of academics to have tier one or tier two internships or firm internships in your CV to show that yes, I have worked with Luthra or I have worked with Wadia Gandhi and firms like that. It is not that important, but obviously all of you would have been told in your first or second years that go to district courts, go to high courts, go to Supreme Court, just to see the reality of law. Because even if if you are an academician, you will teach your students. You will teach your students about the law, about the realities of law, how are they to face it. If you are teaching, especially the procedural codes, for instance, CRPC or CPC, you will have to link it with the actual situation, because the district court situation and the things you study in your CPC or the BEAR Act is entirely different. So until and unless you as a teacher know the realities of it, how are you going to deal the questions of the students? So internships are important, yes, but after a while, after you have 4 to 5 or decent internships on your CV to show, you need not go beyond that. You can then shift on to focusing more on research papers and publications, yes, but do not think that internships are not important. Internships are important in every field of law. I always suggest that go about it. Just don't be so hard on yourself to pursue internships, write research papers, and also go for mooting, do everything. No, 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 that's not right. Focus on one thing at a time. If you are interning this semester, then intern this semester. For the next semester, think of a research idea, think of a research problem, write a research paper. Go on like that. And yes, what kind of internships? I mean, there are fellowships like Teach for India and things like that, but you are able to get it only after you finish your graduation. And I don't think they allow you to, do it while you are in law school. But nowadays, I think many NGOs and places are coming up with ideas, where they allow you to teach their students. IDIA, started by late Professor Shamnath Basir, he has a very, he created a wide network of students wherein students participate and they talk to the aspiring law students from the, people or students who are from a needy background. So they talk to them, they help them pursue their, career to clear CLAT, or to enter into law schools, if you're able to secure places at those kind of places, that is very good. That is actually very good. That adds to your CV, that also adds to you facing the real life situation, that also adds, and that also teaches you how to deal with the student problems once you are a teacher. So if you get opportunities like that, yes, go for it.
Definitely. And I think IDIA has been a very good initiative. I've been a part of it myself. I just have
Yes.
one question in my chat box. It says that if you're pursuing LLM and you clear NET, then do you have to complete your LLM in order to be eligible for NET?
Yes, yes, totally. So the minimum eligibility criteria of UGC reads masters plus UGC net. So you have to complete your masters with a grade, on your CV. And then if you qualify your net, that is not taken away from you. I mean, if you are able to qualify your net in the first semester of your master's itself, that cannot be taken away from you, because the net's validity is for your entire lifetime, I think. So that would not be taken away from you, but you have to complete your master's, you have to write the papers, and then only you can be eligible for, applying for the post of assistant professor. However, I think because of the COVID-19 situation, nowadays universities are also applying. I'm pretty sure Jindal also allowed that even if you are pursuing masters and fulfill the basic qualifications, you can apply for that. But obviously, they will not give you too much complicated tasks, so that you are able to complete your masters first. Yes, so you need to complete your masters first.
All right. So you pursued both of your degrees from NLUs. So my question is, does that make a difference with respect to people who are pursuing from private universities, or is there any sort of differentiation? If you could throw some light on this aspect.
Yeah, if you talk about differentiation, it will come at every step of life, because the first degree which I had is from a lower NLU, as people call it, NLU Ranchi. And the second is NLU Jodhpur, which is one of the topmost NLUs. So, wherever you are, people will compare you. You will see posts everywhere that you belong to a particular university, I belong to a particular universities, but universities do not matter as far as you are able to gather that what do you want from your life, or what do you want of your law career. So as I said, I was very clear from my second or third year that I want to enter into the field of research or academics. I do not want to enter into a law firm. And students nowadays are also very clear from the second or third year that they want to enter into NGOs, they want to teach, or they want to go into a corporate law firm or an IP law firm. They are very clear on that. So whether you are pursuing it from a private universities, from a private university or a government university or the national universities, that does not really matter. So there are things like, as I said, you need to know if you are going to pursue your career in a law firm, you need to have certain things on your CV, or you need to participate in certain things so that they consider you the right candidate. Similarly, when you want to enter into academics, you have to have certain things so that the recruiter thinks you the right person or the right choice for that particular post. These things are to be kept in mind, and not the universities. You do not need to end up crying that I did not get a particular national universities and I'll be nowhere. No, it is not right. It is not right. You also have the option of, after your bachelor's degree, if you are so willing to enter into a national universities or even go abroad, you have the option of pursuing your master's or PhD from your the universities you looked out for in your bachelor's days. So options are many. You just need to be clear about it. You just need to settle down and work hard from wherever you are. That is it.
That is a very correct explanation of all the concepts of life. But further, I'd like to ask a follow up question. How does one maintain a work life balance as an academician? And how would you advise young law students to not fall prey to monotony? That at a particular stage in academics, there comes a time that monotony prevails over for the teacher. because they have to repeat the same syllabus again and again and again. So what is your take on that, and how do you feel that one can tackle it?
Yeah, actually, that's a very right question because I have heard teachers talk about it that, oh, we have been allotted the same subject and the things would be the same, and I'll have to go through the entire syllabus once again. So, yes, there's that. But, as I mentioned, as you already know that I have been working on 2 to 3 research topics as of now. One is for a conference, one is for a publication, one is for a book chapter. So there are many ways in which you can involve yourself. Also, when see as now I am a part of General Global Law School, I have various professors I can talk to. I can talk to about degrees, I can talk to about papers, I can talk to about conferences, I can talk to about how to increase my network. It gets boring. Obviously it gets boring if you have been allotted constitutional law for like 3 semesters and you are supposed to teach the same thing. But law is the, I think, one of the only professions where everything changes by the minute. Everything can change by the minute. If I'm talking about basic structure right now and saying something about it, maybe the next moment you get a judgment where it is overruled. So you never know. What changes. And even if you're teaching the basic papers like contract or constitution, there would be changes. So you just need to incorporate those in your syllabus or in your course curriculum. And you are the teacher. You have that responsibility now, not only to upgrade your students, but also to upgrade yourself. See, when I am, if I am a student, if I was a student at National University Jodhpur studying competition law as a subject, say, and I was presenting a particular topic or I was presenting a particular case law, my teacher expected me to incorporate the changes. Say if a particular I am teaching or I am presenting a particular case law and the judgment was overruled or the judgment was said to be the correct position in law, the teacher expected or the professor expected me to highlight those points because that was my duty as a student. Now, when you get on to this part of the dais where you are the teacher, you have to do the same thing. If you are teaching subjects like corporate law or IPR, which are the hot topics of today, you need to know that there are reports, that there are continuous deliberations over everything, news articles coming up, research papers coming up, people constantly working over it, whether it be academicians or lawyers or advocates, everybody are working entire days, entire weeks to get to the point, to give you the exact uh, standing of a particular subject or a particular law point. So that makes it interesting. Even if you are a teacher and people say things like, okay, you just have to deal with it in the classroom, you do not know the reality of it, you are just with the books or the bare acts, it is not true. Because if my student asks me a question like, ma'am, if this particular case law or this particular problem or this particular argument, how am I supposed to put it up in, if I am to practice litigation, I cannot say that no, I won't be able to answer that because I'm a teacher and not a litigator. That is not the correct approach to it. I should make my student understand, even if it is only one student, if I'm able to change his mind or theory about the realities of law and how interesting this field can be, because it is actually very interesting. And so if I am able to do that, it cannot become monotonous. It cannot become monotonous. And also I have things like, already I mentioned various things. If I keep on participating, if I am a law student for life, and I seriously do not see myself as a teacher, if I remain that for my entire life, learning on new facts every day, learning on new arguments every day, or how to write better papers or come up with better arguments, logical arguments, then it cannot be monotonous. It would be interesting.
Well, I believe that all of us here today are in awe of your philosophies. I would just ask one last question before I open the floor for questions. CLAT PG is approaching soon. So, what are your strategies or recommendations for students attempting the same?
Okay. Again, it is a law examination and the pattern keeps on changing every year. This NLU consortium sits every year and they think that it is right to change the pattern, you know. So, first things first, you need to know about the exact syllabus. Please continuously visit that CLAT consortium account, whatever they have, so that you know the right syllabus. Because as I said, when I was appearing for my CLAT PG examination, it had 100 objective questions, and then I had 50 marks of subjective questions. But the next year, they came up with the entire concept of MCQs again, but passages kind of a thing. They gave passages, and then they asked questions from any part of law they thought would be correct. IPR was included, commercial law was included, when basically CLAT PG questions involved majorly around constitutional law and jurisprudence. Now it is trying to involve all facets of law. So you need to be very clear on your constitutional law, contracts law, criminal law, jurisprudence, to say the least. These are the basic ones. You need to know everything about that, and you should know everything about that. It will be helpful for you in the future as well. After tackling these basic papers or knowing the concepts about these papers, then you can move on to the specific papers like IPR. You will again get questions from IPR. uh, Even if they keep on changing the pattern, you will get questions from those papers. And since I think IT Act is the most the hot debate of the day today, because of the rules and changes in the code which is all coming up. So I think information technology is also gaining stage, and you should also read the important sections, especially the safe harbor clauses and the intermediary protection clauses on that. And then you can also, I think, yeah, and yeah, about the pattern, I would say that please keep checking the pattern, whatever they are doing with it again and again, because even in the net paper, at least the CLAT PG students were told that they will get passage like questions. We, on the other hand, were not even informed about that. And the last 10 questions of the UGC net paper also had passage like questions. So the law part is very complex. They can do anything, very puzzling. They can do anything about it. But as I said, or as I mentioned about the papers, be very clear on those papers, and it will help you out.
All right. I have one question in my chat box which pertains to work life balance for a research professor or an assistant professor. As to the fact that you have a 9 to 5 job with you, and you also pursue your own research study and your own work personally as well. So, how do you manage that, and how do you manage your time? Uh, Considering that you have to do everything in a 24-hour format.
Yeah. So see, uh, you will not get papers if you are, say, if I like papers which is IP and corporate, I am not sure of getting those papers in my very first go. Maybe when I am a 2 to 3 year old professor, or I have an experience of 5 to 10 years, maybe they will want me to teach the papers I want to teach or I specialize in. But in the very first instance, I don't think you will be getting your hands on it, on the papers you like. So what I do is, even if I'm teaching, say, the very arts part of it, even if I'm teaching legal history or subjects like that, and I like competition law or intellectual property law, what I do is I teach legal history in class, come out of it, and keep on reading, for instance, the best websites, or, for instance, Cyril Amachan Mangalas and Nishit Desai have dedicated blogs, for, corporate law. Then there is India Corp Law and websites like that. And I keep checking on Law Octopus and Law Off, so that I know what kind of conferences are taking place in India, and also the international conferences that are taking place, so that I am able to do research in my field, the fields that I like, that is IPR and corporate, because that would be easy for me. If I keep on reading about 2 to 3 stories or 2 to 3 events in IPR or corporate that is taking place every day, that would be interesting for me. Fine. So that way research becomes very easy. You need to you need to read stuff. Never ever stop reading. Because see, if you are teaching a paper like contracts, and if you are interested in papers like IP and corporate, what will happen if you stop reading for like entire 1 month? You would not be able to, tackle the kind of information that would be there for the entire 1 month, because changes occur, as I said, by the minute. So you need to keep on reading. Second thing, you need to keep on writing. As a law student, as a law professor, as a researcher, you need to keep on writing. Write only 4 to 500 words each day. Whatever topic you like, or whatever topic you think can become a research problem for you, or can become a research question for you, just write it. Just write it down. Never quit reading and writing, because you clearly mentioned it, that you have a time slot. You'll have to be a teacher for 9 to 5. You'll have to be a teacher. You have to answer the question of your students. You have to correct those assignments. You have to make that question paper. You have to be present in the class. You have to give a clear reason for why you are not in the class, right? You have to deal those things, and then you have to be a presenter at a particular conference also, which is happening, say, in a week. So just to be sure that you know what's happening in your field, keep on reading, keep on writing, keep on talking to the people you think are the right ones in your particular field. Because once you enter, your job sector in academics, you will find professors, and you will find people who are very approachable, and they will be very good with you in talking about stuff, in talking about the changes that are happening, or their take on a particular law. So you need to keep on talking also. You need to converse. You need to put your opinions in place. You need to know how your opinions or how your arguments sound. So yeah, that way.
Okay, so I'll just take one last question from Nikita. She is asking whether any publication in a reputed journal matters or not. She says that if if one publishes in random journals, will that create a big hindrance in our academics journey?
Yeah, see, this is a very, very valid question, and I want everyone here attending, or anyone there, to understand this, that there are various journals out there right now. If you open any of the websites or any of the law websites, there are these blogs, those websites, or those, journals, or those publishers, they are publishing it for free, or they are publishing it for 1,500 bucks. Do not fall a prey to that. Please do not, because what helps is reputed journals. Now, I am underlining this again and again. Read these 2 to 3 terms, like whether or not it is peer reviewed or refereed journals. Where if it is blind peer review, it is amazing. Again, what is the process they will be undertaking to assess your paper? Then look out for UGC care list. You can again find it easily. Do a basic Google search about it. You'll understand what is UGC care list. And if you are in your senior years, like in your 4th or 5th year, or in your masters, you can also go for Scopus Index journals. Now, why I am talking about Scopus Index journals? Because Scopus Index journals are one of the most cited, or considered one of the most authoritative documents in the law field. So you can visit scopus.com, and then you can find sources. They have, like, I think hundreds or thousands of law journals in it. You just have to find out the right journal where you can publish. They have a certain criteria. They have a certain, basics for the authors who are trying to submit their papers. You just need to go through it, understand it, talk to your professors about it, and also, if possible, try to co-author papers with your professor. That becomes way easier, because it is not only adding on to your CV, it will also add to your professor's CV. So if you can approach your professors about it, please talk to them. Please do not go for some international journal of something, and which is not, these journals are not adding to your CV. As I mentioned earlier, the faster they are publishing, the less worth they are adding to your CV. They are of no use. And on the contrary, they might also act as a hindrance when you're applying to universities, because when I was being interviewed at Jindal, they specifically looked at my CV and asked about my research publications, the places I published, and why did I chose a particular journal. So these questions you might be facing as well, and it was your time, it was your effort, it was your resources. You wrote a paper with all that, and then you cannot just send it anywhere. So do a research properly, because now you are a law student. Research is a part of your daily activity. So just do a research and then only think of publishing somewhere.
Well, thank you for resolving all our queries today, Miss Priya. Well, Miss Priya is a professor of law and she teaches the concepts of law to students. We at Memo Pandits, we have ventured upon a very niche area of teaching all of you the art of memorial making. In pursuance of that, we teach students who are first year or second year or any year of law who wants to know basics of citations or basics of memorial making, or or people who are not that confident with respect to their public speaking skills. We offer them oral argumentation courses, memorial making courses, and citation making courses. I would just take 1 minute of all yours to just present my screen with respect to the courses that we present, and then we can wonderfully end this session. I'd also request all the attendees to fill the attendance form that has been provided in the chat box. Please see to that and do not miss out on that. And in the end, I would just like Miss Priya, I would thank Miss Priya to come here today, taking her time for this session. It was a wonderful session and has, in fact, enlightened us all with respect to our databases in our mind, and cleared a lot of doubts with respect to NET, JRF, or an academician as a whole. Um, just a second, my screen is sharing. It might show in your screens in a while. Screen. Hello, is it visible to everyone right now? So these are the three courses that we are currently providing. If anybody wishes to know more details about the same, kindly contact us at Memo Pandits. With this, I believe that we have reached the end of this particular session. I would again like to thank Miss Priya for coming here today. Thank you, Priya.
It was all my pleasure. Nice talking to you.
Yeah, likewise, Priya. So I think we can successfully end the meeting. Just a reminder that all attendees need to fill the attendance form, which is being provided in the chat box. Please take cognizance of the same, and do let us know if you want to enroll in any of the courses. Thank you.